Sorry if I sound a little bit strange. You might hear a little bit of gravel in my voice this morning, or maybe more like a 13-year-old boy, and that's okay. It's just going to be the way it is for this morning. That's what they told me last week, my voice was cracking, right? It's pretty crazy to think that this is the week of Thanksgiving. Like, it's coming up, and I don't know where the rest of November has gone, but here we are. It's Thanksgiving. And as I was thinking about this idea of it's always a toss-up for me. Do we do a Thanksgiving message before Thanksgiving? Or do you do a Thanksgiving message after Thanksgiving? I don't know. I guess we're kind of going to do both because Daniel's talking about some Thanksgiving stuff next week. It's not really Thanksgiving. Really, the thing that made me think about where we're headed this morning is the idea of Thanksgiving and where Thanksgiving meals with the family, let's be honest, they're not always the greatest, okay? There's usually some source of tension somewhere between somebody, all right? And so I was thinking about that. You know, we celebrate Thanksgiving as a thing. Well, let's get together with friends and family. That's tradition, and we're thankful for everything. And honestly, we're not always so thankful for some of those relationships, right? It's just like, all right, I could eat at home, right, and be good with that. But that's what we do. And so we got to think about that stuff, and we got to think about how to navigate those relationships and all that. So I'm going to call this message Food Fights. Food Fights, all right? Because so often we get together with family, and when it's supposed to be a good time, having a good time around the food, it actually is a fight of some sort, right? There's some kind of tension. There's some kind of something there. And really, that's all this message has to do with Thanksgiving. So there we go. Thanksgiving's done with it. Because what I thought of was like some of the original food fights, and that is Jacob and Esau, all right? When you think about two of the things that happened in the life of Jacob and Esau that caused issue, they both centered around stew, of all things. I mean, I know stew can be good, but it's not that good, all right? But with Jacob and Esau, so if you go to the book of Genesis, Jacob and Esau, they were twins, and most of us know that there was quite a competition between them for most of their lives. They are the sons of Isaac and Rebekah, which make them the grandsons of Abraham, all right? So they're just a couple of generations removed from that. And in Genesis, we read about the two events that I'm going to talk about. And the first one comes when Esau, who is kind of the manly man of the two, right? He's the hunter. He's the man that goes out and he does his thing. He was hairy. He was red. I don't know why that's manly, but anyway, that's what they say. So he was out hunting, and he comes back and he says, "Listen, Jacob, you've been here home all day. You've been tending the kitchen with mom. You got some stew. Give me some of that stew." And Jacob says, "Well, we can make a deal. Let's make a deal, right? I'll give you some stew if you give me your birthright." Now, it doesn't sound like a very big deal to us, but that's a big deal, right? And we won't get into all that, but it was a very big deal. So Esau, actually, he says, "Listen, what good is a birthright if I'm dead? I'm starving. Give me some food." Okay, so very rash decision that he makes there. He jumps on it. He says, "Sure, have my birthright. Give me that bowl. I want that stew." So he eats the stew. And so technically, he gave away his birthright to Jacob. Now, so that's the first little food fight, the first issue, because that comes back around. But the second thing that really causes a problem between these two brothers also centers around stew, around the food, and that is that it was tradition that the oldest son got the blessing from the dad, right? They got the first and the best blessing, the blessing of the firstborn. And so that would have been Esau, because Esau was the firstborn. They were twins, but he was the first one into the world. And so that blessing to the firstborn belonged to him. And so Isaac, on his deathbed, or kind of right about that time, he doesn't know how long he's going to be anymore. And so he calls Esau. He says, "Call for my son." He calls his son. Now there's a problem right there, right? Call my son, Esau, into me. And that's a whole other issue, because Esau was Isaac's favorite. Jacob was Rebekah's favorite. That causes a lot of this thing going on. If you remember it's actually just over a little year ago, I looked it up. We talked about favoritism and that kind of a thing in a message called No Favorites. Anyway, so Jacob and Esau, And so Isaac calls Esau, says, hey, listen, if you go out hunting, get some game for me, bring it back. We'll make some of that stew that I love so much, and I will give you your blessing. And so Esau heads out into the country to go get some game, to go hunting. Meanwhile, Rebekah, the mom, overhears this conversation between her oldest son, Esau, and her husband, Isaac. And she calls Jacob, her favorite son, and says, hey, Jacob, here's what's going down. Let me tell you how to get in on this blessing. And she instructs him on how to deceive her husband, on how to deceive his father, okay, to get that blessing. That's right. That's what we need to be learning around here. And so Rebekah does it. And Jacob then follows through on what Rebekah says. So at the urging of his mom, he tricks his dad into giving him the blessing in the firstborn. So everything that was supposed to be Esau's is now Jacob's. The birthright and the blessing of the firstborn, right? So it all belongs to Jacob. And of course, how does Esau respond to that? Not very well. Like his reaction, he's furious. He comes in and he says, listen, once my dad has passed away, I'm coming for you, basically, right? Once the period of mourning for my dad is over, I will kill him. And so Jacob runs away. And Jacob lives the rest of his life, well, not the rest of his life, but he lives with his uncle Laban, so Rebekah's brother Laban, in wherever they live, and very important detail there. And then he ends up marrying both of Laban's daughters through a whole nother story with that too. But here's where we finally get to, because this is where I want to focus this morning. Jacob has to go home, okay? He has to go to Thanksgiving dinner. He got to sit at the table with his brother, okay? He's got to go home. He has no other choice because, surprise, surprise, Jacob, the one who arranged did all this stuff, also, I would choose a different word, messed with his uncle Laban as well, okay? And now Laban's mad at him. Or his uncle and father-in-law, also a thing, messes with him there and causes issue there. So he's burned another bridge, okay? And so he's got to run. God actually tells him, Jacob, go home, okay? Go home. And so he doesn't really have a choice. And Jacob's attitude, of course, is, I'm terrified. Last time I saw my brother, he said he's going to kill me, right? That's all Jacob knows. Nothing's changed for Jacob, except he's burned a few other bridges along the way, right? Nothing's changed for him. And so he has to go home to Esau, and he's under the impression that Esau wants to kill me, okay? So, scripture this morning, and there's lots of it, because we're going to keep telling this story, all right? So in Genesis chapter 32, it's time for Jacob to go home. So let's read a couple of verses there. It says this, then Jacob sent messengers ahead of himself to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He commanded them, saying, so Jacob is sending messengers ahead of him. He commanded them, saying, this is what you shall say to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says the following, I have resided with Laban and stayed until now, and I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female servants, and I have sent messengers to tell my lord so that I may find favor in your sight. So Jacob decides, you know what? I got to have a plan for this. I can't just go show up on his doorstep. There's got to be a plan. And he says, you know what? If I send messengers ahead, maybe it'll soften things up a little bit at home. So I'm going to send messengers ahead, and I'm going to let him know that I'm coming. I can't just show up. I've got to let him know I'm coming. And yes, Jacob was a scoundrel. Jacob was a deceiver. All of those things are true. And so he still thinks that about himself. This can't possibly go well, okay, if I go home. And so he sends these messengers ahead. And what is the message that he has for Esau? He wants Esau to know, he says, I have lots of oxen and lots of donkeys and lots of sheep, lots of flocks and lots of servants. In other words, I'm not coming back empty-handed, Esau. Like, I'm not coming back to mooch, all right? I'm not coming back to steal anything from you. Like, I'm coming back because that's the way it's got to be. I've got to come home, but it's not in order to take from you again. I need you to know that. Setting the stage, right? And so Jacob sends these messengers with this message to Esau. Now, verse 6, It says, and the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and furthermore, he's coming to meet you. And 400 men are with him. Whoa, that's an army, right? 400 men are with him. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people who were with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into 2 companies. For he said, if Esau comes to one company and attacks it, then the company which is left will escape. So he's hedging his bets. He's like, listen, at least half of us will get out, okay? We're going to split up into 2 groups, and at least half of us can make it out. And you'll notice he's got a lot of people, a lot of stuff to divide. All right, verse 9. And then Jacob said, so he goes on and he prays, because what else is he going to do, right? He's coming with 400 men. I'm hedging my bets already by dividing my groups. I better pray. And so he prays. Then Jacob said, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your relatives. You told me, God, and I will make you prosper. He says this. I am unworthy of all the favor and all the faithfulness which you have shown your servant, you think? Jacob? All right. I'm unworthy of it. For only with my staff I crossed the Jordan, and now I have become 2 companies. Save me, please, from the hand of my brother and from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he will come and he will attack me and the mothers with my children, or with the children. For you said, I will assuredly make you prosper and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be counted. So he's put another layer in this thing for himself, right? Like, listen, I sent my messengers. I'm letting him know I'm not coming to mooch, and yet he's coming out with me with 400 men. So now I'm going to divide my group, and you know what? I should probably pray. So God, let me remind you, God, what you said to me. You said you were going to prosper me. Right? When we were back at Bethel, let me just bring that back to your memory, because you promised it, and you said you would multiply my family. We would be more than the sand on the seashore. And how are we going to do that if you let Esau take us out? It's not going to happen. So let me remind you, God. You said that. I'm coming back here because you told me to come back here, God. Okay? So he prays for God to rescue him and to protect him. And then, because that's probably not enough, I'm going to make another layer of my plan. So Jacob continues on with this plan. It's like, I prayed, but just to make sure, I'm going to keep it in my hands. So verse 13, Jacob continues. He says, so he spent the night there, and then he selected from what he had with him a gift for his brother Esau. So I'm going to give him a gift now. And this is the gift: 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes, that's sheep, and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their colts, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. And then he placed them in the care of his servants, every flock by itself, and he said to his servants, pass on ahead of me and put space between the flocks. And he commanded the one in the front, saying, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong, and where are you going, and to whom do these animals in front of you belong? Then you shall say, these belong to your servant Jacob. It is a gift sent to my lord Esau. And behold, he is also behind us. And then he commanded also the second and the third, and all those who followed the flocks, saying, in this way you shall speak to Esau when you find him, and you shall say, behold, your servant Jacob is also behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the gift that goes ahead of me. Then afterward I will see his face, and perhaps he will accept me. So the gift passed ahead of him, and he himself spent the night in the camp. In other words, Jacob's sending some pretty big gifts to Esau. And it's to continue to soften him up, isn't it? Right? He's trying to soften his blow. He's like, listen, I'm going to send all of these herds. This is the gift. And it's a pretty impressive gift. 220 goats, 220 sheep, 60 camels, 50 cows, and 30 donkeys. That's only part of what he owns. He's like, Jacob is a rich man, right? And he's taking this and he's saying, listen, I'm just going to give this to my brother. It'll soften the blow if he knows. First of all, remember, I told him that I had my own stuff. Now I'm going to prove to him how much stuff that I got, how much value I have, and that I'm going to bring to him. And this is just part of what he owns. I can afford Esau to give this to you. Take this as my gift, okay? Have this as a way of me buying some grace back from you in this. And so he divides each of these flocks according to its own kind. So he has all the sheep here and all the camels here and all the goats here. And he sends them on ahead with the messenger. And every time one of these groups get to Esau, the servant is supposed to say, hey, my Lord Jacob is coming too, okay? But this is for you. And then the next group comes and says, oh, Jacob is coming, but this is for you. So he doesn't just get a big gift. Now he gets a parade, right? And it's an impressive thing. So who knows how long this took? Did he space them out every half hour? And so at 9 o'clock, the goats go, and then at 9:30, the sheep go, and then at 10 o'clock. You could be looking at hours of Esau receiving gifts. It's pretty impressive, right? It's not just one big gift. It's a parade of gifts. And it's a little more than showing up at Thanksgiving dinner with the cranberry sauce, right? Big gift. But you can see Jacob's plan. You see what he's doing. He's softening the blow, okay? So finally, it's time for Jacob to meet Esau. Because he's done everything he can do. He's given him gifts. He's warned him. He's prayed. He's done everything he can do. It's time for Jacob to meet Esau face to face. And you can kind of feel Jacob bracing for this moment, because I've done all this stuff. I even prayed, but I really don't know how this is going to go, okay? I really don't know how he's going to respond, because he's laid his plan, but has it been enough? Has it been enough? So then in chapter 33, Genesis chapter 33, it says this: Then Jacob raised his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 slave women, and he put the slave women and their children in front, and then Leah, and then Rachel and Joseph last. But he himself passed on ahead of them, and he bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck, and he kissed him, and they wept. So as I'm reading that, I'm like, well, did Jacob's plan work? I think Jacob thought his plan worked. I think Jacob was convinced that all of this softening that he had done, all of these gifts, everything that went ahead of him is what made Esau ready to run and grab him and kiss him. But in reality, I don't think so. Because if you look at Esau's reaction, if you read a little bit, just a couple of sentences later, a couple of verses later, Esau goes, what was all this stuff for? Why'd you send me all these gifts? And Jacob says, well, it was to find favor in your sight. And Esau replies, I got enough of my own. I don't need your stuff. You could have kept it. But Jacob insists. And the fact that he insists tells me he thinks something about that is what convinced Esau. No, you've got to keep it, because if I take it back, well, you might change your mind about this. I want you to know I'm serious about this. That's what Jacob is thinking. Now, I know it's taken us a little bit to get here this morning. But here's what God showed me in this scripture. We're like Jacob. We're like Jacob. We're the ones who have ruined the relationship. We're the ones who have offended. It's our fault. And many times, because of it, we ran away. We ran from the responsibility of it. We're running for fear of our lives. We've snuck around behind God's back. We've taken advantage of the situation. We've manipulated it. Okay? Now, you can think of this in terms of outside of a relationship with God. Okay? So you don't have a relationship with God before you were born again, or you can think of it in your day-to-day relationship with Him when you mess up and you know you do. I mean, come on. Jacob knew who he was. He knew exactly who he was. He knew that over and over in his life, he had cheated, he had deceived, he had manipulated the situation in order to benefit him and his circumstances. And he knew who he was. He knew how it affected other people. He knew that he hurt people. It cost people, but that didn't stop him. And finally, when he was confronted with it and he has no place to go, he's got to go home. We know who we are. At least we think we know who we are. We know the struggles we face. The thoughts we think, the things we do that cost other people, that cost God, we know that about ourselves. We're like Jacob. And so when it comes time for Jacob to go home and to face his brother, the one who has been the target of multiple schemes in Jacob's life, the guy who the last time that Jacob interacted with him, the last time that he heard from him, Esau said, "It's only a matter of time before I kill you." As far as Jacob was concerned, Esau was waiting all of those years just around the corner, plotting how he can get back at him, plotting how he can take him out, plotting how he can repay Jacob. And that's the image we have in our minds. We've wronged God. We've offended. We have manipulated God and his generosity and his grace, and he wants nothing more than to take us out. Tell me I'm wrong. That's the image we have of God. Even though we claim grace, this is the image that God, of God in our minds, the things that we really believe, most of us anyway. He's just waiting to get us. You made your bed, now you're going to have to sleep in it, right? You've heard that one? You reap what you sow. You've heard it? You know how we can know if that's the image of God that we have in our understanding? We can know when we choose to come home. And we know when we come home, we can know how we come home. When you've recognized you messed up or you behaved in a way that's not consistent with Jesus, you did something that hurt him, something that cost him, do you come home telling him your value? Do you come home telling him, you know what, like I know I'm coming home, but I'm not here to mooch off you, Jesus. I'm not here to take from you anymore. I'm not here to steal. Like I can bring my own weight. I can pull my own weight in this thing, okay? That's how I'm coming home, okay? I'm coming home, but it's not to take from you. I just need a place to stay. I'm just coming back. Or do you come home reminding him of the things that you bring with you? Do you come home offering him gifts in order to soften the blow of showing up at his front door? Gifts. Like, God, I'll give more. In fact, here it is. Let me give it. Here it is. I'm serious this time. I'm serious this time. Not because I want to, but because it'll get me back in his good graces somehow. It might make him smile instead of frown when he sees me coming. Lord, you can have anything. Just let me come back. You know what I'm talking about? You do. You know what I'm talking about. Because we're all there. Because the question is, when you're in that position of offering God your value, of convincing him what you can offer him, or offering him gifts in order to get back into his good graces, what do you believe will happen if you don't? What do you believe will happen if you don't do that? If you don't do it this way, if you don't bow down 7 times before you get to him to show him the respect that he deserves, to show him how serious you are about this, your subservience, what's the image of your head that's going to happen? Listen to me. When I read Jacob doing this, operating in this way, I don't think anything that Jacob is doing is sincere. This is another scheme, whether he recognizes it or not. He probably thinks he's sincere, but this is another scheme to manipulate Esau. He says, I will appease him with the gift that goes ahead of me, and then afterward, I will see his face, and perhaps he'll accept me. This is a scheme. This is how most of us approach God. We attempt to manipulate him, to appease him with our offerings. We're willing to sacrifice some of what we have and make a good show of it to impress him so that he might let us back home. We try and soften the blow towards us so that we can be assured of our safety, of our salvation. When in reality, we are scared out of our pants of what he might do. So we're just trying to hedge our bets. And here's the thing, Jacob prays about the whole situation, doesn't he? He reminds God, God, you promised. Let me just bring this. God, you promised. You said you would. You promised that my family, my descendants would bless this whole earth. Back at Bethel, God, you promised. Remember when we first came out? You promised me. So please rescue me. Keep your word. And then immediately after he prays that, and he knows that God promised. He's reminding God that he promised. But immediately after that, he hedges his bet again and he sends this gift to Esau. He doesn't really believe it. Just in case God wasn't going to keep his word. In case he couldn't believe God. God has given us this gift. This promise of life in him through Christ. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. But can we really believe that? It's a promise. We don't act like it. Genesis 33, verse 4. Then Esau ran to him and embraced him and fell on his neck, and he kissed him, and they wept. Because Jacob sent him 220 goats, 220 sheep, 60 camels, 50 cows, and 30 donkeys. You think? I don't think so. I don't think so. Did he run to meet him and embrace him and kiss him and cry over him because he believed that this time Jacob wouldn't steal from him? This time Jacob is a changed man. He's not going to mooch this time. No. Because he loved him. Because he missed him. Jacob's assumption the whole time was that Esau wanted him dead, or at the very least needed to be convinced to allow him to come home. But he assumed wrong. He assumed wrong. And I believe he was wrong for a very long time. In fact, I would say that Jacob lived most of his life believing that Esau wanted him dead. That's why he ran. And the fact was, I believe Esau changed that tune very quickly. He missed his brother. He wanted him home. And here's the thing. Jacob believed Esau wanted him dead, but he didn't come to that conclusion on his own. He had help. If you go to Genesis 26, verse 41, this is when Esau has deceived Jacob has deceived Isaac, and he took Esau's blessing. Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near, then I will kill my brother Jacob." Now when the words of her elder son Esau were reported to Rebekah, she sent word and called her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Behold, your brother Esau is consoling himself concerning you by planning to kill you. Now then, my son, obey my voice and arise and flee to Haran to my brother Laban." Jacob didn't come to the conclusion that he needed to run from his brother Esau by himself. He was instructed to. He had help. And his mom only wanted his safety. She only wanted to protect him. She even says later on, she says, "Go and live with my brother Laban, and when it's safe to come back, I'll call you." But she never calls him back. She never tells him anything different. And so Jacob lives in fear of Esau for his entire life until he comes back. This is Rebekah, who, by the way, caused this issue in the first place by instructing Jacob to take a blessing to deceive his father. Jacob didn't get there on his own. He had help. It was well-intentioned help, but it was help. Many of us have well-intentioned people in our lives reinforcing this idea that God is out for vengeance against you. When the reality is that because of what Jesus Christ has done in his death and his resurrection, all God is waiting to do is run and meet you. And to throw his arms around your neck, to hug you and to kiss you, and to tell how much he loves you and how much he missed you. And yet all we can imagine that he's waiting for us and for our return is so that he can exact his punishment. Maybe a little less because of grace, but that's the way we imagine it. And so we stay stuck in the cycle of fear and shame and blame and manipulation of trying to convince God that he should forgive us and he should allow us to come home. And it's all reinforced by good Christian people. And get this, it works. That's the worst part. It works. The results are, for Jacob, it works. He's allowed to come home. And Jacob thinks the whole time it was because he sent all these gifts and he did all this stuff and he did everything himself to make sure it works. That's the worst part. He's convinced it's because of his behavior. He insists that Esau keep all the gifts that he offered him, even though Esau expressly says, I don't want them, I don't need them. Because Jacob feels like he finds forgiveness in acting this way, he's convinced that it works. And how long does that last for Jacob? How long does it last for him? If you go to Genesis 33, verse 12, this is right after they have embraced and they have been reunited. Esau says, listen, let's go home. Let's journey on and go, and I will go ahead of you. But he said to him, this is Jacob speaking, Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail and that the flocks and the herds are nursing, they are a matter of concern to me. And if they're driven hard just one day, all the flocks will die. Please let my Lord pass on ahead of me of his servant, and I will proceed at my leisure at the pace of the cattle that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children until I come to my Lord at Seir. That's where Esau lives. So Esau says, let's go home. And Jacob says, awesome, let's go home. I'm coming with you. But listen, you go on ahead because I got all these flocks and we got to make sure we go at the right speed. I've got kids and they can't rush home that way. And so Esau understands and he agrees. He's like, you're right. You can't push them. I'll go on ahead and I'll wait for you there at home. And Jacob says, great, it's a plan. Let's do that. Verse 16, so Esau returned that day on his way to Seir, but Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built him for himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the place is named Succoth. He never went home. He never went. Never made the journey all the way to Esau's house. Didn't go. So how long does this reunion last for Jacob? About as long as it takes him to get back in the good graces. Jacob never went. You go on ahead, I'll catch up. Sorry. Right? Got away with another one. Because Jacob thinks his offerings and his humility and all of that is what convinced Esau to forgive him and to welcome in, he's stuck in the cycle. He's back where he started, isn't he? Now he's got to find a way to make up to Esau for lying to him about coming to his house. He's stuck in the cycle. He burns another bridge with Esau, once again telling him that he's going to follow him and meet him at Seir and then and live happily together in existence as brothers. But instead, he turns and he goes to Succoth and he lives there. And I think that's an extremely appropriate name for the place that Jacob lives for a little while anyway. Because living in that cycle of fear and shame and blame and thinking that you're earning your way and you're making it happen, that's a place that doth sucketh. In all seriousness, it's a never-ending cycle of being proud of yourself for coming back and convincing God that once again he should forgive you, and then not so proud when once again you understand or believe yourself to have manipulated God so you can stay away. But the freedom is knowing that God doesn't need your gifts. He doesn't need to be manipulated or convinced. He doesn't need to be softened up so that you can come home. He just wants to wrap his arms around your neck and to kiss you and hold you and walk arm in arm home. Doesn't the story remind you of a story that Jesus told? The lost son, the prodigal son. The one who manipulated his dad and ran away with his inheritance. And when he finally came to his senses, because he had no other option, so he came to his senses. It's usually when we come to our senses, when we don't have any other option. When he finally came to his senses, he went home. And he went home with a plan, ready to convince his dad to let him be his servant. How many times does Jacob tell Esau, I'm just your servant. I'm your servant Jacob, your servant Jacob. He reminds him, I'm lower than you. I'm your servant. And when the dad sees him, the dad runs to him, wraps his arms around him, kisses him, and celebrates. I don't want to hear about your plans to be my servant. I want you, my son. We have to get over this hump. Our God is generous. His love is lavish. His grace knows no end because that's who he is. Hebrews 4, verse 16 says, therefore let us approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace for help at the time of our need. Understanding that it's by grace alone by which we can approach the throne of God, it eliminates any need for posturing, for manipulating, or for convincing, because by definition, grace has nothing to do with us and what we offer. It's absolutely everything to do with him. And we can approach God with confidence because it is a throne of grace. I didn't say cockiness. I didn't say arrogance, though he'd probably take you that way too. We can approach the throne of grace with confidence that it's in him. It's not in me. In approaching with confidence, we can know that he has approved us already in Christ, and we are free to rest in him and live with him. And that is the best life. There is nothing else to try to achieve or to get away with, because he is the ultimate prize, and getting to be with him is what every single person ultimately wants, whether they know it or not. It's what they need. It's what we were created for. So let us come boldly before the throne of God and worship him, for he is good. It's the throne of grace, and there's no reason to hide. There is no reason to be ashamed. We get to come back to him. Lord, we are like Jacob. We know that we're not worthy for all the things that you have done. We know we don't deserve it. We know we crossed the Jordan with just a stick. And now we come back because we're your kids, because you made us that way. We have an inheritance that we can't even imagine. God, we have wealth beyond imagination because of you. Because we're your kids. because we're yours. But it's because of you, Lord, because of what you've done, Jesus, in us. It's never because of what we do to try and convince you. There is no convincing. You've already made up your mind how you feel about us. For God so loved the world. God, would you help us to believe that? Like in sincerity, would you help us to believe that? Not just say it, but believe it. Would you help us to live it? So that we can be free in this relationship with you, that we don't have to create, we don't have to posture, we don't have to pretend, we can just be. God, would you let that be true? We love you, Lord. We love you, Dad. Amen.